Hey everyone! So, it's been a little bit since I made a video, and thought I'd just drop in and be like, hey, what's up? Anyway, I was like thinking the other day, and I was just like, I realized I've never really talked about who I am, what my story is, or how I got to be interested in these topics. And so I thought I'd give you like a little piece of my story. Maybe I'll do like, I don't know, uh, like a few different shorter videos explaining my story. So, part one of how I got to be really interested in women's issues, especially what I would consider traditional feminism, like the background that I came from and whatnot. So, here we go. So my name is Laura, if you didn't already know that. I'm almost 29 in a couple weeks. I know it's going to be the last year of my 20s, which I'm not really, I don't know. In some ways I'm ready. I'm ready to cross over into 30s, but in other ways it is kind of, that marker. So one more year of my 20s left. Woo. Anyway, so I'm gonna be 29 in a couple weeks here. I have 4 children. My oldest is 11, and then I have a 5-year-old and a almost 3-year-old. They're all my sons, and then I have my youngest little nugget who is gonna be 1 this May, and she is just gorgeous, and I love everything about having a little girl after having 3 very crazy boys in a row. Yeah, I love all my boys so much, but she's definitely refreshing. just just having that feminine energy in our home, is so refreshing to me because I have missed having that around. Even our dog is male, and not that I don't love males, because I love my sons, I love my husband, but it is really nice to have that beautiful relationship with her that's so different than I have with all the other people in our family. So anyway, so that is the basis of that. My husband and I met when I was 16 years old, and um, yeah, we got pregnant right away. Um, we weren't living our faith. Well, to back up before that, I was actually not Catholic at the time. I grew up as a Protestant. My dad went to school to become a pastor, and he worked on and off, but most of our life he spent in ministry, in some form of ministry, whether that was pastor, assistant pastor, elder. He was always really involved in church ministry. And so I grew up, my background was technically non-denominational, but I would say the closest thing to what I grew up with would have been Baptist. So pretty strict upbringing. I would say, like, I mean, most Christian bands I couldn't even get away with listening to because it wasn't acceptable. So I grew up very, very strict. I was homeschooled all the way through, which has its pros and cons. Pros being that I really didn't, I learned to not really care what other people thought. Although I did at the time, I see now that I care less about the outside world and what's going on in it. And I'm more focused on what's going on, like what I can do to change my life. So it does bring a strengthening in that way that you don't care as much about everything else around you. But the con also is that, you don't experience as much of life as, other people get to. So it takes a little bit longer for you to come about to that time period where you feel like, I've seen what there is to see, and, now I'm satisfied where I am. But again, some people never get there, so maybe that has nothing to do with homeschooling. It's just one of my things. So, and it did cause a lot of strain in my relationship with my mother and my father, but most especially my mother. So I think homeschooling can be great if it's balanced, and if it's not causing irreparable harm to the people in your family and your relationships with them. So, that being said, I'm not anti-homeschooling. I'm not. It just depends on your situation. For me, I am not currently doing that with my oldest because he has some special needs, and I saw the same pattern of damage to my relationship with him because I wasn't able to help him in the way that I should have been able to. So, he is going to school, and a Catholic school, and it's wonderful. They're doing a beautiful job. I may homeschool my other children who don't have those issues. Sorry, I'm getting over this horrible cold. It's been quite a long week of fevers and craziness with all the kids, but I think, are over the big hump of it. Anyway, so that's a lot of my background. I was homeschooled, Protestant, and I just, from a very young age, I remember, hearing the whole, gospel. Sorry, this is all shaky, but it's the only thing I've got right now. The whole gospel, and being like, so I asked Jesus into my heart, which I remember doing at a very young age. I was about 5 years old, and it was actually my grandmother who led me to Christ and asked me if I wanted to say the little prayer. And I did, and I remember it very well, sitting in front of her fireplace, saying the prayer, and my grandma crying, which I find very beautiful now, looking back, because I realize most people don't have that kind of emotional connection with their grandmother. So I remember that very well. I was 5 years old, and I remember going to church and thinking, wow, I'm saved, and all this stuff, and we believed in once saved, always saved. And so that, I think, causes a lot of damage, because once you're saved, you can do whatever you want, it's no big deal, none whatsoever. You never have to, you just say, God, forgive me, and you're fine. Your intentions don't matter. You could have intended to do something and, wrong, and still just been oh, well, I'm sorry, God, later on, and, you think that you're still going straight to heaven. So, so that's how I grew up. I remember at around 9, 10, going to camp for the first time. And I remember really loving it. It was a Christian camp, and it was great. They had all their praise and worship. I remember rededicating my life to Christ at that point, because I knew that I wasn't ever diligent in my devotionals, reading the Bible every day. I would do it for a while, and then I'd be this isn't really interesting. I'd get stuck in the book of Leviticus or something, and I'd be what no. So so a lot of times I would just burn out and not stick with it. I wouldn't pray. My life really lacked in prayer most of my life, and actually into the last couple of years, I would say my life really lacked in prayer. So I would say, so that's when I started realizing, though, was that I kept having these patterns of falling away and coming back, falling away, coming back. And I just always felt there had to be more. How could it possibly be that Jesus just, all I have to do is say a prayer and I can do whatever I want for the rest of my life? It doesn't matter. To me, that seemed really empty. You know, like, why am I coming to this church every week to hear some pastor or my dad or whoever who's completely unqualified because he's not God give his interpretation of Scripture? And I began to really see the holes in it when I was about 12 years old. And that's when I started questioning things. I remember I've always been kind of like an academic type A nerd. Like, I like knowing things. Maybe that's part of the homeschooler coming out in me. I don't know. But I remember like doing research papers on different religions and reading different religious texts and just like really looking into it. I was really interested in Buddhism for a while because I sensed a peace there that I didn't have. Just like the whole idea of meditating and finding that Zen or whatever they call it, finding something without of myself, something that wasn't within, but at the same time, the peace within myself. I never had that peace. I was looking so desperately for it. So I remember I really liked the idea of Buddhism for a while. Catholicism, my family is very anti-Catholic, extremely anti-Catholic. To this day, they pretty much are sure that I'm burning in hell, or will be burning in hell, unless I repent and stop worshiping Mary or whatever. Which is just a gross misinterpretation of our faith, as solid Catholics know. So I, it just, so I just kept looking and I kept looking, and finally around the age of like 15, I had made friends with this one guy, and his family was in the ministry of helping like converts from the Protestant to the Catholic faith. They were converts themselves. And he started just like feeding me little bits. Like, I forget what he said exactly, but what he really got me on was the literal interpretation of the Bible. Because we were a literal interpretation people. Like, what the Bible said, that's what it was. Period. There was no, going around it. But at the same time, whenever something didn't match up with what they wanted it to mean, they would always be like, context, 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 context. Well, essentially, I realized after some time of my dad bending Scripture to mean whatever he wanted at the time, whatever rule he wanted to do in the household, or I would look at him and be like, yeah, I know, like, you're completely using that, twisting it, making it whatever you want. So once I realized that was happening, and I realized it was a literal interpretation, but he was preaching literal interpretation, that's when I started to listen a little bit more to, what my friend had to say. And he was like, well, what about John 6? Like, you say you believe in a literal interpretation, but, what about John 6? And I was like, well, I don't know what John 6 says off the top of my head. And then he was like, okay, well, I want you to read the entire chapter. So I did, and I realized I was in deep crap because if I really believed in a literal interpretation that I preached that I did, that I had been taught was real my entire life, I could not deny what it said. And, this is my body, this is my blood. It doesn't say, like, this is a commemoration or a memory, or this is, like, a symbol of my body or a symbol of my blood. That it is my blood, my body. And I remember asking my dad about it, and he was like, oh, well, that one's not literal. It's all about context. And I was just like, Dad, I read the entire chapter. That is in the context of the chapter. Nothing in that says that it is a memory or a symbol or anything. And he just kind of shut down. he's like, well, you need to read the whole book of John. So you know what I did? I read the entire book of John. And I could not find anything that would suggest that it was a symbol. And I remember just sitting there being blown away that my dad, who was like the authority figure at our house, the authority figure at a church, like he had no answer for me. Someone who had been to college for theology, no answer. Absolutely none. He just completely had no answer. And that's when I realized I was in the wrong faith. I realized that a little bit earlier because I was looking for something more, but that was like the nail in the coffin, you know? So at that point, I realized that by watching my friends that were Catholic and were so entirely happy and were so full of life and so full of love and, seeing all the good things that they did for other people, it was just like an outpouring on other people, and they never ran out. Like, they were never like tired of it, They never, that light just never burned out that I saw in so many other people that I had grown up around. So I knew at that moment when I was almost 16 at that time, that I would eventually become Catholic. I was pretty convinced of it at that point. And I was dating a Protestant guy that pretty much my dad loved because he was really docile, and so my dad could pretty easily control him. And I was, after a while, that just really wasn't attractive at all to me. So while I was still dating him, my other friend, the one who had kind of spoon-fed me the truth about the Catholic faith, it was like, I have this friend, and I just think you would absolutely love him. At the time, I had spent my entire life studying classical music in piano and violin and voice, and that was what I was going to go to college for. I had full scholarships everywhere, or pretty, depending on the college. A couple of them I had full scholarships. Other ones were partial, but more than half. I had good grades, had everything going for me. I guess you could say I was the oldest golden child of the family, as I did have 3 younger siblings. And, things were going great. And then I met, he's like, this guy, he's like amazing pianist. He's amazing. You guys would just totally click. And I met him, and that was all it took. One time I met him, and I remember just like being enamored by him immediately. And I went to I went to my friend's birthday party that night. It was her 16th birthday party. No, it would have been her 17th. Sorry, she's a little older than me. Her 17th birthday party. And I looked at her and I was like, I met the man that I'm going to marry. And she just looked at me like I was like insane. And she was just like, yeah, I'm sure, Laura. Like, I was always boy crazy, so she was just like, okay, whatever. Which, looking back, I would have said too to myself. But something deep inside me knew that, like, that was the guy. That was it. And, oh my gosh, did he pursue me like none other. And I got to see him a lot because I was driving my sister around to all her dance practices, and he was involved in all the props and setup of it. And it was just like fireworks, like nothing like my boyfriend. I actually like dumped my boyfriend the day after I met my now husband. I was like, oh, I'm sorry, this isn't going to work out. But I felt the need to hide it from my parents because he was Catholic, and I knew that would never work. It would never work for them to know that he was Catholic. I knew that I wouldn't be allowed to date him because of his faith. And I had already aligned myself with that faith, so I thought, I'll just continue to date him till I'm 18, and then we'll come out and, I'll come out as Catholic and we'll, continue to date or get married or whatever. So, but got ahead of their plans, and we had no self-control whatsoever in our passion for each other. And 3 months later, we were together for the first time, and I got pregnant the very first time that we had sex. And the crazy thing about it is, about a month before we were together, I had this dream that I was in my bedroom was in the basement at the time. I had this dream, and I'll never forget it. I've had a few dreams that I'll never forget, but this one was kind of a turning point, a changing point in my life. And I was walking up the basement steps in this dream to the upstairs of our house, from the basement to the main level. And I just remember in my dream hearing all this like screaming and just like chaos. Chaos is the best word to describe it. Just screaming and chaos. And everyone was crying and freaking out. And I was walking up these steps, and I was walking through the living room, through the hallway, through to the front door, and I opened the door onto the front porch, and it was a covered front porch, and there at the entryway of the front porch was this bright being. Like, the only way I could describe it was an angel. I couldn't see his face. It was so bright. It was like gold. And he held this very heavy golden cross with a chain, like a big chain with a heavy golden cross. And I walked forward to him, and he didn't say anything to me. He just looked at me very lovingly, and he placed his really heavy chain around my neck, and he took me by the hand, and he led me. I followed him. He took me by the hand, and he led me up through the corner of my yard, up, the driveway, and out. And I never went back. That was my dream. Like, even though there was so much chaos, I had peace inside, knowing that, like, this was the path that was given to me. Like, so I woke up knowing that there was going to be a major shift coming in my life, and I figured it probably had something to do with the fact that I had already made up my mind that I was going to become Catholic, and that would be a really heavy burden to my family and to me, knowing it would cause a lot of problems. But I had no idea that I would lose self-control and end up pregnant the very first time I had ever had sex. So what ended up happening is that my family didn't take it very well, to the point where it became very abusive. My parents would spend hours tearing me down, calling me names, throwing things at me, smacking me around, and my dad actually had the nerve to call every single person, all 200 people in our church, and make me admit to them that I was pregnant by a Catholic man over the phone. And at one point, I had to stand in front of everyone while they made an example of me at their church. So, no mercy, no love, no mercy. Eventually, my grades dropped, so I was in college at the time, at a local college, doing some classes, because I had high enough grade point average, and I could, go to college early, while still finishing my senior year. And I went from, like, the top of the class to all of a sudden I'm a C student, and my professor was like, what the heck is going on? And my mom was driving me to and from college. She actually escorted me to and from each class. They would take the phone off the hook every single night and take him back to the bedroom. They were so afraid that I would tell someone what was wrong, what was going on in our home. So they took every precaution they could possibly take. It kind of felt like, I was an abuse victim, but, the only thing missing was sexual abuse. Like, it kind of felt like being, like, a slave, like, human slave, like, what I imagine would be like to be trafficked, except not, sexually abused. So, by them, just, it's horrifying. I'm just now, after years and years and years of going through it and pulling it apart piece by piece, really just like able to say that I forgive them for what they did. It tore my humanity apart. But with all that happened, someone noticed finally that I wasn't the happy-go-lucky, top-of-the-class person I had always been. Someone noticed, a friend of mine, and he asked me what was wrong, and I told him I was pregnant. That's why my mom was here. Sorry. And he was like, "Are you okay? What's going on?" And I told him very quickly my mother had, for some reason, had to go do something. She was gone for about 20 minutes. There was a 20-minute time lapse that I had to tell him what had happened. And he looked at me and he goes, "The next time that your mother will not be here, please let me know. I will drop everything. I'll drop every class. I don't care. I will drive you to a crisis center, and we will tell someone your story." And so I did that. And I got a hold of my boyfriend, who is now my husband at the time, and he met us there, and we told them, and she knew we weren't lying, that we really did care about our baby and, what was going on. And so she made a call to CPS because I was still 16 at the time. And she made a report. And a couple days later, a CPS worker showed up on my doorstep, and I was home that morning. I don't think I had class that morning or something. For some reason, I was still home. And what ended up happening was she came to the door, and I think I was in the bathroom. I was sick or something. I was super sick that first little bit of pregnancy. And my mom was like freaking out. And the lady looked at me and she was just like, "Do you want to talk?" And I was afraid. I was so scared to talk. So I ran downstairs. My mom followed me downstairs, and she was just being so cruel and saying so many things to me, like, "How dare you? Who did this? Da 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 da." And she locked me in my room. And I was crying and crying and crying. She locked me in my room. She went back upstairs to deal with the CPS lady. And she thought that was going to be her solution. Well, once I realized, I was like, wait, I do want to talk to this lady. I don't care what it costs me. And I tried to open my door, and I realized that I had been locked in. And I just started screaming because I knew that I was right underneath him. And I was like, "Open the door. Why did you lock me down here?" And the CPS lady came down and realized that I had been locked in. And that was it. the CPS lady was like, pack your things. This is obviously not okay. My mom started, like, calling my dad at work. They called all their church members there. The CPS lady started, writing everything down, what was going on, and she led me up those steps. I remember leaving, it was a couple hours later that I had packed all my things. Everyone was there. Everyone was arguing. All the chaos that I had heard in that dream. That's what it was. All the crying, the arguing. And she took me by the hand. And on that front porch, she took me by the hand and she led me out of that corner of that yard. And she took me to my grandma's, just a couple houses down. And that's where I was placed in temporary custody at the time, until they sorted everything out. It ended up being permanent custody after my mom pulled another stunt. They wanted to put me in a home for troubled girls. And I remember always, drug addict. I was not a drug addict. I was a top student. The only thing I did is I committed a sin and I got pregnant and I got caught. Unlike all the other girls in the youth group, I'm sure I know we're on birth control and not getting caught. So, so I got caught and they wanted to put me in a home for troubled girls and troubled pregnant girls. And that, and in the pregnancy thing, they make you give up your baby. The father has no right to see you or his baby, and they make you give it up for adoption. That was their plan. So my mom picked me up from grandma's one day. She was given the right to take me to my classes one day. And before I left, my grandma, I can only say the Holy Spirit moved her to do this. My grandma handed me a small, tiny little Nokia phone. I don't know if you remember those, but they were very, very small. And it just had, tiny little buttons on it, and not a flip phone or anything, just, the very basic first, cell phones that came out. And she said, if anything goes wrong, here's your social worker's phone number. Call your social worker and then call me. And so, I don't know what moved her to do that, but she was so afraid to let me go. And, but she did. So, I got in the car with my mom. She drives me to my classes. And that day, I got really, really sick. And I ended up missing one of my classes. And she realized that I had missed it. And it was because I was in the bathroom puking my guts up. And then I went to one of my friends, a girl that I